Each morning, as the sun gently pierced the veil of clouds, the quaint town of Maplebrook stirred to life, enveloped in the familiar bustle of its residents beginning their day. The bakery swung its doors open, filling the air with the comforting aroma of freshly baked bread, while a group of schoolchildren laughed and chattered on their way to class. Amid this daily rhythm, there was another presence that had settled into the fabric of the streets. A forlorn dog, its fur tangled and filthy, meandering slowly near the town square. This dog, a frail blend of breeds, seemed to fade into the town's backdrop. Like clockwork, it would shuffle toward the outdoor tables of a cozy cafe, its large, sorrowful brown eyes fixed on the diners as they indulged in their meals. Occasionally, a kind-hearted soul would toss a scrap or two in its direction, but more often, people would overlook it, too engrossed in their own lives. The dog never barked or growled, never caused a stir. Instead, it sat quietly, waiting patiently, as if clinging to the hope that today might be different, that someone might finally notice its plight. But still, no one did. No one, that is, except for a woman named Sophie. Sophie was a reserved woman in her mid-30s who worked at the local library. She was beloved in town for her gentle spirit and unwavering love for animals. Over the past several weeks, she had increasingly noticed the dog, observing it in its familiar spot by the cafe, its body growing frilier with each passing day. There was something haunting in the dog's eyes. They bore a sorrow that ran deeper than mere hunger, a desperation that tugged insistently at her heart. One crisp autumn morning, Sophie reached her breaking point. She could no longer turn a blind eye to the dog's suffering. After ordering her usual coffee, she purchased an extra sandwich from the cafe and approached the dog with cautious resolve. Its ears perked up at her presence, yet it remained still. Sophie knelt down, extending the sandwich toward the pitiful creature. "Hey there, sweetie," she said softly, her voice laced with compassion. "Are you hungry?" For a moment, the dog hesitated, its trust wavering. Then it inched closer, its nose quivering as it caught the tantalizing scent of food. Sophie watched as the dog gently took the sandwich from her hand, as if it were afraid she might snatch it away. "There you go," she murmured, her heart aching as she observed the dog eating with such care, as though it had learned to be cautious even in its desperation. Yet, an unsettling feeling gripped Sophie. Something was profoundly wrong. She had encountered many stray dogs, but this one was different. It wasn't just hungry. It was steeped in a sorrow so profound it gnawed at Sophie's soul. In the days that followed, Sophie returned to the cafe each morning, bringing nourishment for the dog. With each visit, the dog began to place its trust in her, greeting her with a tentative wag of its tail. Yet, it remained firmly rooted in its spot near the cafe, reluctant to venture elsewhere. Sophie couldn't shake the questions swirling in her mind. Where had this dog come from? Did it belong to someone, or was it truly a stray? And why did it linger in this particular corner of town? One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the street, Sophie made a decision. She would follow the dog to uncover its secret. She maintained her distance as the dog finished the meal she had provided. Then, with a soft sigh, the dog stood and began to make its way down the street. Sophie quietly trailed behind, careful to remain unseen. To her surprise, the dog didn't wander aimlessly as she had anticipated. It moved with purpose, seemingly guided by a destination in mind. It trotted steadily through the tranquil streets of Maplebrook, passing the library, gliding by the town park, and heading toward the outskirts of town. Sophie's curiosity intensified. What could lie ahead? Why did this dog choose this path night after night? Eventually, the dog turned onto a narrow dirt path that led to a small, abandoned house at the edge of a field. The structure appeared as if it had been untouched for years, its windows boarded up, and the yard overrun with wild weeds. The dog approached the house and settled down at the front door, staring at it with the same heart-wrenching sadness it had displayed at the cafe. Sophie's breath hitched in her throat as she approached the house cautiously, her heart racing. Why was the dog here? What was it waiting for? The dog glanced back at her, as if to acknowledge her presence, but soon redirected its gaze to the door once more. A chilling sensation washed over Sophie. Something was profoundly unsettling. Sophie knelt beside the dog, her fingers gently brushing through its unkempt fur. "What is it, sweet boy? What are you waiting for?" she whispered, her heart aching for the creature before her. As she lingered in that moment, a realization washed over her. What if this had once been the dog's home? What if it was waiting for someone who might never return? The thought of the dog spending endless nights here, hoping for a family that was lost to time, felt unbearable. She knew she had to take action. The next day, Sophie returned to the abandoned house, this time with a purpose. She reached out to the local animal rescue, seeking their assistance to uncover the story behind the house and the dog. The volunteers were deeply moved by the dog's plight and eagerly agreed to investigate. What they discovered was heart-wrenching. The house had once belonged to an elderly couple who had passed away nearly a year prior. With no children or family to tend to their home, it had been left in silence, forgotten by the world. But the revelation that cut the deepest was that this couple had owned a dog, the very same dog Sophie had been feeding. When the couple passed away, the dog was abandoned, left to fend for itself, and had been wandering the streets ever since, returning each night to its former home, desperately hoping its family would come back for it. Sophie was shattered by this news. The poor creature had been trapped in a cycle of grief, waiting for a family that would never return. It had survived on scraps, clinging to the fragile hope that it wasn't truly alone. In that moment, Sophie understood her mission. She could not allow the dog to suffer any longer, not when it had endured so much heartache. With the animal rescue's help, Sophie arranged for the dog to be taken in and given the care it so desperately needed. The volunteers lovingly cleaned him up, treated his malnutrition, and ensured his health was restored. They even bestowed upon him a name, Buddy. But Sophie knew that Buddy needed more than just food and shelter. He needed a family, a heart that would embrace him with love. And so, Sophie made a life-changing decision. She would adopt Buddy. Initially, Buddy was hesitant, still tied to the routine of visiting the old house. However, with Sophie's unwavering patience and kindness, he gradually began to realize that he had found a new home. No longer did he need to wait by the door of an empty house or beg for scraps at the cafe. He was finally home with Sophie, who loved him unconditionally. As weeks melted into months, Buddy blossomed into a joyful, healthy dog, his spirit renewed and his heart full of hope. Buddy's once sorrowful eyes now gleamed with joy, and his tail wagged exuberantly every time Sophie returned home from work. The bond between them deepened with each passing day, and it soon felt as though Buddy had always been a part of Sophie's life. However, their story was far from over. One day, while enjoying a walk with Buddy, Sophie crossed paths with a woman she had never seen before. As the woman strolled past the old abandoned house, she caught sight of Buddy and froze in her tracks, her eyes widening in recognition. "That's him," the woman breathed, tears welling in her eyes. "That's their dog." Sophie's heart raced. "You knew the couple who lived here?" she asked, a mix of hope and anxiety flooding her. The woman nodded, her voice shaking with emotion. "They were my neighbors. They cherished that dog more than anything. After they passed away, I tried to take him in, but he ran away. I've always wondered what became of him." With a gentle smile, Sophie replied, "He's with me now. He's part of my family." The woman wiped a tear from her cheek, relief flooding her features. They would be so happy to know that he's found a good home. As Sophie and Buddy resumed their walk, a profound sense of fate enveloped them. Buddy had once been lost, and now he was found. He had endured abandonment, but he was loved again. In their shared journey, they had saved one another, weaving their lives together in a beautiful tapestry of hope. This was a poignant conclusion to a tale that had begun in sorrow, but now both Buddy and Sophie were poised for a future brimming with love, hope, and the promise of countless joyful days ahead. Sophie's heart felt lighter than it had in months as they walked away from the woman who had known Buddy's past. She marveled at how their paths had converged in such a serendipitous way. Buddy, once a forlorn creature with sad eyes, had been waiting for someone to love him again, and Sophie had become that person, granting him a second chance at life. Yet, it seemed that there were still untold layers to Buddy's story, mysteries woven into the fabric of his existence that Sophie had yet to uncover. The woman's tearful recognition of Buddy as the cherished pet of her elderly neighbors unleashed a torrent of thoughts in Sophie's mind. How had this gentle soul managed to survive on his own for so long? What memories and experiences lingered in his heart from his previous life? Sophie yearned to uncover every detail of Buddy's past, but for now, she took solace in knowing that he had finally found peace. In the days that followed, Sophie's mind often wandered back to Buddy's previous owners. Her curiosity about the couple who had loved him so deeply grew with each passing moment. The emotional reaction of the woman upon seeing Buddy had ignited a spark within her, compelling Sophie to learn more about those who had cared for Buddy before she came into his life. One afternoon, Sophie made a decision. She would visit the woman's home, hoping to glean more about Buddy's past to fill in the gaps of his story and perhaps even understand the bond he had shared with the Thompsons. With Buddy happily trotting by her side, they made their way to the quaint cottage at the edge of town where Mrs. Green lived. When Sophie knocked on the door, Mrs. Green greeted her with warmth, her eyes instantly softening at the sight of Buddy beside Sophie. "Oh, please come in," she urged, stepping aside to welcome them inside. "I've been thinking about him ever since I saw you both." Sophie smiled, feeling a sense of comfort as she entered. The house was cozy, filled with the delightful aroma of freshly baked cookies and the gentle hum of a radio playing softly in the background. Buddy seemed to recognize the scent, his nose twitching with curiosity as he explored the familiar space. "I wanted to know more about the couple who owned Buddy," Sophie began gently as they settled into the living room. "He's such a wonderful dog, and I believe that understanding his past will help me connect with him on a deeper level." Mrs. Green's face brightened with fondness as she started to share. "The Thompsons were the sweetest couple you could ever meet," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "They adored Buddy as if he were their own child. With no children of their own, he meant everything to them. He was their faithful companion, their source of joy," Mrs. Green shared, her voice brimming with affection. Sophie listened intently, her heart swelling as she envisioned the happy life Buddy must have shared with the Thompsons. Mrs. Green continued, recounting how the couple would take Buddy on long, leisurely walks through the picturesque countryside, how they would sit together on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun dip below the horizon, with Buddy lying contentedly at their feet. "They were inseparable," she said, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. When Mr. Thompson passed away, Mrs. Thompson was left heartbroken, but Buddy was always right there with her, never leaving her side. Yet when she fell ill and passed a few months later, Buddy, well, he simply didn't understand why they were gone. He kept waiting for them to come back. Sophie felt a lump form in her throat, understanding now why Buddy had been so sorrowful, why he had returned to the old house time and again, yearning for the family that had loved him so deeply. "I tried to take him in after Mrs. Thompson passed," Mrs. Green continued, her voice trembling. "But Buddy was so devastated that he ran away. I searched for him endlessly, but it was as if he had vanished. It broke my heart to think of him out there all alone, without anyone to care for him." Sophie reached out, gently taking Mrs. Green's hand. "He survived," she said softly. "He's here now and he's safe. I'm taking care of him." A grateful smile broke through Mrs. Green's tears as she squeezed Sophie's hand. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You have no idea how much that means to me." For the next hour, Sophie and Mrs. Green exchanged stories about the Thompsons and their deep affection for Buddy. Mrs. Green even shared several old photographs of the couple with Buddy as a puppy, his fur sleek and shiny, his eyes gleaming with happiness. As Sophie gazed at the pictures, she felt a profound connection to Buddy, knowing that she was now a part of his story, just as the Thompsons had been. When it was time to leave, Mrs. Green embraced Sophie tightly. "Take good care of him," she urged, her voice filled with heartfelt gratitude. "He deserves all the love in the world." "I will," Sophie promised, her heart brimming with warmth as she and Buddy made their way back home. That night, as Sophie settled onto the couch with Buddy curled up beside her, she reflected on everything she had learned. Buddy's past was woven with threads of love and loss, but now he had a future illuminated by hope and happiness. Sophie was resolute in her mission to ensure that Buddy's days were filled with the same joy he had known with the Thompsons. In the weeks that followed, Buddy flourished in his new home. His coat grew shinier, his eyes sparkled with life, and the sorrowful look that once haunted his expression was replaced by a serene contentment. Sophie took him on long walks, just as the Thompsons had done, and they spent their evenings together, savoring the quiet comfort of each other's presence. One sunny afternoon, as they strolled through the park, Buddy suddenly stopped, his ears perked up with curiosity. Following his gaze, Sophie spotted a small figure approaching. A little girl, no more than 6 years old, holding a leash attached to an enthusiastic, tiny puppy. The moment the girl saw Buddy, her face lit up, and she dashed over, her puppy bounding joyfully beside her. "Can I pet your dog?" she asked, her eyes wide with delight. Sophie beamed and nodded. "Of course." The girl knelt down, her tiny hands gently stroking Buddy's fur. "He's so nice," she giggled, her laughter ringing like a bell as Buddy licked her hand playfully. "I just got a puppy too. His name is Charlie." Sophie watched with warmth in her heart as Buddy and the little puppy sniffed each other, their tails wagging excitedly in unison. In that magical moment, Sophie realized just how far Buddy had come. From a lonely, heartbroken dog begging for scraps, he had transformed into a joyful, healthy companion, spreading happiness not only to Sophie but to everyone he encountered. As they resumed their walk, Sophie felt a profound sense of peace envelop her. Buddy's journey had been long and arduous, yet it had led him to a place where he was once again loved and cherished. In return, Buddy had filled Sophie's life with an immeasurable amount of love, healing a void she hadn't even recognized until he entered her life. Ultimately, Sophie and Buddy had saved each other. As they walked side by side, the sun setting gently behind them, Sophie knew they would face whatever challenges life threw their way together, bound by love, loyalty, and the unbreakable connection they had forged. It was a beautiful conclusion to a story that had begun with so much sadness. But now, both Sophie and Buddy were embarking on a future filled with love, hope, and the promise of countless happy days ahead. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to the channel and like this video. We release a brand new video every day, so stay tuned to this space. We invite you to leave your thoughts and theories in the comments section below. Take care, and see you in the next video.